I would first like to begin with how broken down, if at all, is our healthcare system in Alberta?
Well, I think that healthcare system has many facets and is very heterogeneous, and so that creates a kind of strength. So it would be impossible for anything, I think, to break it entirely down. And so, no, it's not entirely broken. It has weaknesses, but I don't think it's entirely broken.
How would you summarize it?
Yes, well, first of all, I would say that there are strains to the system, and those strains to the system come from a number of factors that haven't been taken into consideration, or because the affairs of the culture in which we live has run ahead of the government and the ability to handle them. And so there's a number of things that come from a number of different directions that alter the effectiveness of the system. And we perhaps can have time to discuss some of these differentials, but it's not surprising to me that some people say the system is broken. I mean, I went to the emergency room and sat for 8 hours when I had an accident on the ski slopes, and so I think the system is broken if I have to sit for 8 hours.
That's amazing. So if you were to pin it down, Dr. Solez, what would your what would be the inherent weaknesses or flaws that you?
Well, I think there's such a preoccupation with fixing things and bringing the numbers for things like wait times to a more acceptable level that we're missing a lot of the technological change that is going on. And we are in a situation where we risk going from shooting for excellent health care to simply adequate health care. You can be both. There are different mindsets. The idea of shooting for excellence, shooting for adequacy, we need both. And we shouldn't lose sight of the possibility, making use of the leaders that we've already recruited here to stay in front and to keep being cutting edge in many new areas of
Sorry
medicine.
to interrupt you there, but these very leaders are supposed to be getting, like corporate bosses today. They're behaving like corporate bosses today. They were gotten from different parts of the world, in fact, if I've done a bit of my homework. And they're just not being able to achieve what has been set as an objective. So what is it that is happening out there?
Well, you can look at it various ways, but the infrastructure that the medical leaders came here expecting to find is less present than they ever imagined, and so they're facing extraordinary problems.
Like what, for instance?
In recruiting faculty and retaining faculty, in keeping very promising research enterprises going, in balancing high-quality clinical care and moving the whole field forward through world-class research. These are the things that the medical leaders came here to do, and it's just become much harder.
What's stopping this? What's stopping them from getting? Is it the lack of people? Is it policy? Is it government?
It's no one thing. It's the situation that we're in. It's the economy. It's decisions made to try to fix things that are the most obvious, like wait times and so on. And yet we can't lose focus on excellence and making the world a better place, not just keeping things as they are and keeping things adequate as they are, but actually moving things forward as we always have been able to do in the past.
Dr. Waugh, would you chip in here to tell us what you feel?
Well, first of all, Canada's undergoing an incredible variation in demographics, right? I mean, for example, for the last about 10 years now, we have brought about 250,000 new immigrants here from various parts of the world. And the reason for this is pretty obvious. Canadian women are not having children. And we need about that many people to enter the workforce in order to keep things like pensions and health care plans and other kinds of things going. Somebody's got to pay the taxes for it. So we bring in people from all over the world. That issue then plays out in doctors having to deal with language problems, with cultural issues. It has to deal with issues of, well, I expect to get what I pay for type attitudes. It means that, well, I came to Canada because they said you had an excellent healthcare system. I mean, all of these things play into the fact that a healthcare system has got to deal with a situation that hadn't been built into the infrastructure of the healthcare 10 years ago.
You know, I would have understood all this had I not read an OECD report which says that Canada is one of the top spenders as far as, I mean, minus the US. US is an anomaly. It's spending over the top on healthcare and still not getting rid of its problems. But here in Canada, we are one of the highest spenders over and above what Europe is spending on healthcare, despite the fact that the population does not match what it is in Europe. They have a more densely populated continent. But so where is it? Is it some lack of efficacy of the system itself?
Well, the system certainly doesn't have efficacy in some areas. I mean, let's take MRIs, for example. I mean, it may be, for example, that people want to have MRIs done for everything, but in fact we now know that it's not effective for some things, and so we're spending millions of dollars doing MRIs because people demand that kind of service, and doctors, you know, acquiesce in it, and the system accepts it. But in fact, we know that is not effective for a number of things. So that's one issue. That's a cultural issue in which everybody thinks that excellence is defined by, if I walk into an emergency, I should be able to get an MRI done immediately. Well, I mean, that's hundreds of millions of dollars if you spread it across the country. We can't afford that, frankly. So we may spend an awful lot of money, but the demands that people are making on the system are far beyond, and part of it is what Kim's talking about with the technological explosion. Everybody sees on television a program that shows that, you know, MRIs are the way to treat something, and so if you go to emergency, you have to have an MRI done or you're not being treated effectively. Well, those kinds of demands on a system can't be met either by a government official sitting down and say, okay, we're going to put X number of million into this, and nor can they be met by officials in the university hospital saying, look, we've got to put more money into MRIs. It's because the demand increases far beyond what we had planned in the first place.
Dr. Solez, would you agree with that? Would you?
Yeah, there are some things that are province specific, particularly in my area of anatomical pathology. The idea of the virtual microscope, the virtual slide, surprisingly, it's actually superior to the real microscope and the real slide. And our province is at the bottom in the embrace of this virtual slide, virtual microscope technology. Every other part of Canada is actually ahead of us. And why is that? Well, I think it's because of this focus on covering the basics, medicine as we knew it in the past. Let's get that right, and not really much of a focus on medicine of the future. The 5-year plan talks about the electronic medical record as the only high-tech thing. And that's a very old concept. It actually antecedes the Internet. I mean, it sounds sexy, but it is a very old concept. And that's the only technologic change that the 5-year plan talks about at all. So the possibility of the province being blindsided in a major way by this, exponential change, the very great rapidity at which technology is moving to make meaningless a lot of the ways that we practiced medicine in the past, because the new ways will be so much superior, cheaper, better in every way. So we've brought the best people here, but we're now frustrating them by not allowing them to very easily do what they came here to do, and particularly not mentioning at all. It wouldn't cost anything to simply mention this possibility in the 5-year plan, but it's not there anywhere. And so it's not a matter of cost, it's a matter of mindset. Focus on medicine of the past.
So what technology, I know you've juxtaposed these two, medicine and technology. What kind of technology? I know that Dr. Waugh just said that, MRIs is not the only way ahead. So what is your...
Well, let's take some of the things that the public would be well aware of, like robotic surgery, for instance. We imagine there'll be immense progress there. The use of genomics, gene therapy, nanotechnology. There are many, many areas that are moving extremely quickly that are going to revolutionize medicine. It's very exciting. A lot of people here know about this, but the healthcare system does not have a word to say about it, suggesting that it's not a part of, the future is not a part of their thinking, in a sense.
So what I summarize is the fact that policy making, or the lack of policy, or the lack of vision for the future in policy making is what you both would agree is what needs to be looked at, because that's one of the...
Well, yes, that's essential, but you have to also be aware of the demographic changes that are going on in the province. For example, in the West, in Western Canada, the renaissance of Aboriginal populations has meant that there are certain kinds of diseases that are far higher on the scale than other diseases in other parts of the country. So, for example, if right now, Regina has about 53% Aboriginal in that city, and Edmonton probably by 2030 will have around 30 to 35% Aboriginal population. Wouldn't it make sense then to shift the population or to shift the resources towards the kinds of diseases that are going to be predominant in the larger demographic that you have? So from my perspective, I don't see in the 5-year plan a kind of agility of footwork to move from what we would call a kind of general basic pattern of what we think is excellence to addressing issues that are critical right on the ground. And I'm talking about diabetes, for example, right? I mean, diabetes in the Aboriginal community is at a crisis level, and if this population is going to grow at the level that we think it's going to grow, then it would make sense, I think, from even Kim would agree with this, that what you have to do is put resources into the area where you could see that the demographics are taking you. So, I mean, it's in the same way, to have a look down the road and see what kind of technology is coming, you should integrate that kind of vision into planning for 5 years, because by the time you make the decisions on this, 2 years will have gone by, and you're already way behind the 8 ball. So I think both of us agree on those issues.
So going ahead, there's also a great dearth of professionals. Do you think the policy makers are addressing this in some way? What is the way out for this? There's a lack of physicians, even though, and I know, Dr. Waugh, you've been talking about it, even though a lot of people from outside with international qualifications are just there in the sidelines, and this a common phrase of taxi drivers being doctors is commonly heard. It's not new. So do you think something needs to be done there, that it's a human resource wastage problem as well?
Well, I think probably it is. I think it's disgraceful to bring somebody in with a high degree of technological ability and have them driving cabs when they could be doing something far more important to society in general. These issues are very complex, however, and of course people come from so many different places in the world with MDs whose abilities we can't really get a handle on. So I'm not sure that it's government that has to deal with that. I think really the whole healthcare organization has to re-look at that system, because we have all kinds of places now who can't get an ordinary family doc. I think that issue is coupled with a number of other issues, and that is the the change of the workforce in family doctors. You know, the move from men focusing on family doctors to women, which now must be about 50% of the family doctor population. That's one factor. Another factor is the fact that the young people, the young docs that are coming in have different interests. They don't have the kind of old-fashioned I'm here to help everybody type thing. And then the foreign doctors have what we would call cultural interests. They have certain people that they want to deal with, and they don't want to deal with others. And so it's not just a matter of saying to every doc who walks in, yes, we're going to accept the criteria of your MD degree.
Yeah, it's not just about human resources either, because if you look at parts of Canada or parts of the world that have no medical care whatsoever, you could, with cell phone technology, with enhancements, in a sense, bring medical care to people who've never had it before. That's very exciting. And there's not a word in any planning document to indicate that in this province people are thinking about that. What diagnostics can we put into a cell phone? Where could it be useful? What are the regulations around that? Any time where you change things in the way medical care is delivered, you have to worry about, are you reducing the quality? Are you increasing risk? But when you go from an area that's had no medical care whatsoever and provide good quality medical care, there's no question that you've done something good. And the technology of being able to do that with devices as opposed to people is getting better and better.
So you are hopeful that this ratio of physician to population will not matter because of technology that would be used in unintrusive robotic surgeries, etc.?
You could imagine, yes, as robotic surgery gets better, the human being supervises and could supervise more than one operation at a time. That's just one example. And so similarly, if you have some sort of cell phone technology that is giving you heart rate and other data about the patient, you need to add in the human factor. But maybe it would allow you to take care of more patients and at a higher quality than if it was all directly human to human.
But is it, you say it's not happening here, and so where do you see the pitfalls of this not? What's going to be the future?
Well, as I say, it starts with writing about the possibility. I mean, once you write down that this is possible, that you're looking into it, then it becomes something that one can actually pursue. As long as it's not in planning at all, that's almost an absolute barrier to making it happen.
Dr. Solez, you will have to answer Dr. Waugh. I've been reading a bit of his work, and he's talking about the cultural nuances. Now, that is what is a great threat to kind of things that you are proposing, and the world is proposing, modern technologies and things like that. This whole issue of how there are cultural differences even for the way that people like to die, for instance, the Aboriginals and stuff like that. We've not taken the religious, and that is a major factor, because there's this whole debate about the fact that I might like to die in my house instead of a hospital. How would you answer him? How would you say?
Well, I think that he's absolutely right. These things are very important. They enter every aspect. You can look at countries where there was a revolution and they discovered they had too few doctors. They made all the nurses into doctors, and now nobody wants to see any of those younger doctors. They ask, how old are you? And if you're not beyond a certain age, they don't want to be seen by you because you're not a real doctor. So there are many cultural aspects that are very, very key. But I would point out that artificial intelligence, the possibility of technological devices doing things, they could figure out some aspects, at least some primitive aspects, of what culture are we dealing with here, what therefore should we do. I think that needs to be factored in, just like other things do.
Would you agree, Dr.
Well, yes. I mean, you have to keep in mind that, the amount of sales of what we would call herbal medicines and other kinds of medications across the United States and Canada are in the billions now. In other words, people are self-medicating before they even consider a doctor. So, in effect, what we are looking at is a revolution in terms of people spending money on medicinals and other kinds of drugs. And so this is an issue that should play into a discussion on what we should plan for as a healthcare system. Maybe the healthcare system should focus, right, on things like Kim's talking about. Maybe it should focus on these kinds of forward-thinking things and invest in these kinds of things, and then open up the what we would call the doctoring to a much broader understanding of what medicine will be. Because people are voting with their feet. I mean, they're walking in the store and buying tons of this stuff. And they're paying big money for it. And so I read the other day that there's more spent in this area of medication in the United States than there is on the medical system, if you can believe that. So that means then that the whole medical system, which in world parlance, has got to be the elephant, is now outgunned by, the mom and pop stores that sell stuff on the side. What does that tell you about the confidence in the healthcare system? And I think that's another issue that you have to deal with. In other words, the definition of what is medicine and how it is going to be applied has now got to respond to influences that are being driven by the culture at large.
We've already realized that it's important for a physician to know more than science. And we have, in a number of medical schools, we no longer require the MCATs. We would allow a student with a background in philosophy or music or something to enter medicine as long as they had the basic skills. And so there is recognition that we need to think of a broader category of human being practicing medicine, and partly to understand the culture. Mm-hmm. That I think when you only know the science, then the culture is beyond your ken. You can't figure it out. So if you have a background that makes it easier for you to figure out the cultural facets of things, it means you're more capable of practicing medicine.
I guess it wouldn't be right to just to keyhole it into just culture. I would say it's spirituality. It's this disengagement of the body from the spirit, as Dr. Waugh just so emphatically points out. It's not just the body. It's just psychological impact of, for instance, modern day diseases, even on developed countries and people living in the developed world.
Well, we've talked a lot about existential risk, the kind of democratization of evil. It used to be only big governments and corporations could do really bad things, would threaten the existence of all mankind. Very soon, people will be able to learn that in university, both how to do good things and bad things. So we need to be trusting the basic humanness of each other, and so that spiritual side becomes really the most important thing. What will prevent somebody who learns about how to make Grey Goo, say, in college and could wipe out mankind? What will prevent them from doing it? It has to be something on the spiritual side, their feeling about the way life is, and so on. So I think that's absolutely crucial.
So one thing we've agreed upon is the fact that the government is not thinking either about what you are proposing or what you are proposing. So health legislation failed. So we still have this problem that the health system is sliding slowly by, despite the fact that billions, I think 17% of GDP, I think, is being spent by the Canadian government on healthcare, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. And this is slated to increase. But in a world where there are so many budget deficits, what what is likely to happen? Do you see it further cracking up? What do you?
Well, it's never simple, is it? So if we had simple answers to that question,
we'd be millionaires.
Yes, we would. So it isn't simple, and particularly predicting what's going to happen also isn't simple. But on the technology side, maybe it is, in a general sense, possible to predict many things about how important technological change will be. You know, at what point will robots be able to do many things that human beings are doing now, and so on. That's almost more predictable than other things about, you know, changes of politics and
So why doesn't the government get it? Why don't they get it? It's not space science that one has to actually send them back to school.
Well, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with the perception of what the voting public wants and what the voting public knows. And so that's changed quite a lot. As long as people really don't understand, you know, technology change at all, as long as the average person doesn't, then maybe the government feels that they don't have to worry about it either, because the average person is worried about wait times and doesn't know anything about future change. But I think that that's changing. The latest book, What Technology Wants, by Kevin Kelly. It's a very readable book. There are wonderful insights on every page. And I think that as more and more books like that come out, really accessible books, not books where there's a barrier or only some people would want to read it, then the voting public is going to realize that this technological change and the rapidity of it is a very important factor that needs to be factored in. And so that will presumably change policy once those who are running the enterprise realize that the people voting for them now care about this.
But even if they do realize it, okay, for a minute, let's say they do realize it, where's the money going to come from? So do you see privatization in the future?
Yeah, but it's a hot button issue, right? Healthcare is a hot button issue, and in this province, ever since Ralph Klein was in power, it's been a hot button issue. And so Albertans are jittery about the whole issue, and so anybody who sits in the minister's chair is going to say, okay, now we've got to play this best for the media and for the people out there, because we don't want to get unloaded onto by everybody. But the fact of the matter is that you can only introduce so much change into a culture like this and have them accept it. And to argue the way the government often does as to whether we're going to have a private enterprise system or a public system, I mean, in my view, that's old hat. That is beside the point. The discussion that should take place now is, what should we put our money into? Where should we place our stress in terms of what we can buy? And what are the demographics looking like that we should address? That's, from my view, that's the best way to look at it. I don't think the government has done that. I just don't think that they've looked at all of the issues and said, okay, what we have to do is get the public to debate how much they want to invest in this. Do we, for example, we want to give a Cadillac treatment to everybody that's over 80 years of age? I mean, we know that the seniors, let's say, what is it? Every minute now we have one of the boomers becoming 65. Right? Mm-hmm. What are we going to do with these people? Boomers, generally speaking, are not the healthiest people among us. I mean, they're generally speaking, they have been excessive in lots of ways. Are we going to treat all their ailments? I mean, isn't that worthy of a debate? Should we put everybody who has a long-term ailment in an institution? Should we do that? And how much would it cost us to do that? And we could see that in, about 10 years' time, we'll have about 25% of the population will be over 65. Should we treat all of those people at the same level? Is that what the public wants? Is that their definition of what a public system should do? I think those kinds of things
But
should be
there's
debated.
another part of this, and that is the old person, the person who's old and functioning, and the Hayflick limit is 140 years. That's the limit of cells no longer turn over after that. All the things that kill us off and make us ill before that are presumably things that we can cure or prevent. So that also needs to be factored in. Not only the fact people are getting old and they'll be sick, but also people are getting old who won't be sick, who are doing just fine.
I think there needs to be a revolution in the world today, because on the one hand you have these able-bodied people who are 65, 70, 80, and they're just on the sidelines of society. They could be so productive. We keep talking about women not producing more children, but don't you think the revolution needs to begin as to how productive, how can I make this man more productive? How do I force these companies to set the age limit for able-bodied people who want to earn a living beyond 65? Working and setting these parameters for what age is should be something that should be from individual to individual. Don't you think the whole societal...
It sort of depends upon what sector of human activity you're talking about. But you already have in medicine and law people working to quite late ages, and I think that will happen more and more. It gets down to, do people enjoy what they're doing, and do they want, if they live to be 100 or 120 or 140, do they want to do the same thing, have only one job for that entire time? Probably not. So it's not just society's responsibility to keep people on when they're older and older. It's the individual's responsibility to reinvent themselves, learn new things, prepare for a new career that represents what you're interested in now. And so this idea, and the idea that actually people have this problem of too much time. Everybody thinks they have so much to do, so little time. Very soon they're going to have exactly the opposite problem. They have too much time and they don't have a plan. Well, what am I going to do now? I ain't got a clue. That's not going to be good.
But somewhere the government needs to step in terms of policy, even on, not forget about this whole debate, this whole wider debate. There are these simplistic issues like setting legislation. Schools should not have soft drink outlets. This kind of healthy living, which we are just trying to propagate by saying go to the gym. But it starts with legislation, whether soft drinks should be taxed more, like cigarettes. Don't you think it's time that this kind of...
Well, of course, that's a divide between a liberal and a conservative political viewpoint, right? A liberal would probably opt for legislation, whereas the conservative would say, well, the individual's got to decide himself whether he wants to go to the gym or not. So that's part of what I would call a larger debate, and I think that debate is what kind of society we want and what do we expect from the healthcare system. But if we can go back to healthcare, then I really do think that we have to define what it is our priorities are between now and, let's say, 2030, and expect the government to meet those kinds of priorities. And then when some other issue comes up that's not met, we don't, depreciate the government for not meeting what we didn't expect of them to do. In a way, the 5-year plan is what would we call a nice, safe little piece of work, right? It really doesn't take us anywhere except to keep the lid on things. I don't think that we can really afford just to keep the lid on things. I really do think we have to have a community debate about what we're going to do about a number of these issues.
There are more and more sources to look at futurist thinking about what the future is going to be like. Future planning without any futurist thinking doesn't make any sense. It's just kind of covering the bases, it's like management out of fear, It just is not the way to proceed. If you have a future plan, it should be based on what is going to happen in the future. And that's becoming better and better known, and the pace of change is becoming more rapid. The ironic thing about the 5-year plan is it talks at the end about, accelerating change. So I thought, well, finally, they're talking about exponential change, but they're not. They're just talking about the old-fashioned changes we're talking about here, the stuff we were doing in the past, let's do it better. How can we make that occur more quickly? That's what accelerating change means to them. It's not what it means to the rest of the world. And so that kind of tension between their use of that term and the way that people are using it outside, I think gets exactly to what the problem is, that they're not really thinking about the future in this 5-year plan.
But they would tout nanotechnology research at University of Alberta as the fact that they are leaps ahead into the future. They've leapt ahead into the future. Do you think that's...
Well, there's nothing about that in the 5-year plan. So
is it even happening?
Yes,
It
is happening, certainly. And the people doing those things are very frustrated to find this complete silence about what they're doing in the major planning documents coming out from the system.
But is it heading somewhere? I mean, is there hope out there?
Certainly,
in nanotechnology?
it is heading
despite all the secrets around it, secretive cover over it.
I wouldn't say it's secretive, and in practically every area you can think of, it has enormous promise, and as that promise grows, so do the risks. So, one thing that this book that I've been talking about, What Technology Wants, points out is that there's this inevitable progress. We really can't stop. There are all these other books saying, whoa, enough, the authors of all those books saying, don't go there, whoa, slow down, they don't really expect you to do that. They know that's not going to happen. There's this inevitable progress. But we need to be factoring this in a practical way. It's not something separate from basic healthcare policy planning. It should be interwoven completely.
Let me give you an example. If we're going to have 25% of the population over 65, doesn't that mean that we should have some geriatric doctors being trained, right? Well, is it being done? No. Very few programs in Canada are concerned with geriatric patient care and developing the skills that go with it. That seems to me to be a planning issue that should be dealt with, right? And it should be dealt with because the population is aging even when we bring immigrants in, because they bring mom and dad in, and so the overall scale of aging doesn't change with immigration. So my point is that if we're going to have to deal with this, then maybe policy should be saying, look, we deal with this issue. Is it true that the government now has to deal with these issues? Well, they've been backing out of this area for the last 10 to 15 years. Everything, from seniors' homes to other kinds of things, they've downloaded onto the municipality. Well, is that the way to do it? Maybe we should have a discussion about that. Then, if we decide, in fact, that we're going to take care of seniors, then maybe we should put some money into teaching geriatrics and putting more emphasis on that. Those are the kinds of things that I think a policy issue should deal with. And of course, you can always blame the government because it can't foresee things that are down the road, but I just think that we've got to make some planning for what we can see 10 years in the future. It certainly can tell you that that's important on the technological side, and I think it's important on the cultural side, because the population base here is going to be entirely different by the time, that we're gone.
So what is your future, what do you see ahead of you? I mean, the way things are going, what's your reading of 10 years from now?
Well, I'm not very good as a futurist, but I could see some things on the horizon. And one of the things I see is multiple models of what it is for medical care. We have it now with chiropractic and with naturopath and things like this. I think in the future we're going to see a far more dominant program of possible areas where you could be treated. That's one thing. Second thing I think we're going to have to deal with is the changing demographics of youth. If you look around now, we spend millions in building hockey arenas. How much do we spend for seniors' workout places? I mean, it's just pretty obvious. We haven't yet caught up to the fact of where we're going. I mean, in a few years' time, we'll have more seniors than we'll have kids. So it doesn't make sense to me to put money into schools and into hockey arenas when you're not going to have the people there to use them. So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is the obvious, that we have to plan for what the kind of population base that we have. And so therefore, I think there should be that kind of discussion. And then thirdly, I really do think that we have to decide, and it should be a public debate, and it shouldn't be that the minister has to ride only a party line. He should say, here are the issues that we have to deal with. Let's hear what you have to say on these, and let's make some kind of decision about what we think we can afford. And that may be a province-by-province thing. I don't know. But I do think it's the kind of debate that if government were really interested in moving ahead, that they would have. And then technology would have its say. Other aspects of society would have their say. The religious community could have their say. And when it all comes down, the government can make a decision, and then people could say, well, this was fair.
But do you see it going there? Do you see positivity in the future?
No, I don't. I'm sorry, I don't see that happening. I said, you asked me what I hope I would see. Well, that's what I hope I see, but
what do you fear it's going to be? It's going to be more waiting? What is your worst fear in the health as the healthcare system?
I don't think I even want to talk about that.
No, let's talk about it. I mean, we've ignited the debate today because, this is part of that conversation. Perhaps you could trigger that conversation.
Well, I just doubt that either Kim or I have that kind of impact on the public to do that. But, I mean, I'll say a few things and then he can pick up. I would say that what you have to do immediately, because what is coming very soon is a different kind of profile of major diseases that we have to treat here. I think that's one of the things that I think has to be dealt with. Secondly, I do think that we have to look at modernizing the technology that we have. I mean, I think it's important that we move in these directions because many of these things can give us mass assistance, where now we are dependent upon an operating room with one or two doctors. Maybe we could do that on a mass scale. And certainly when this comes to hip replacements and stuff like that, I think that's absolutely essential. So,
we I think, have a basis for optimism, and that is that we can help determine what the future will be. We're not just passive victims of the future. We shouldn't just be reactive and trying to, figure, oh my goodness, look what's happened. Look at what these numbers are. What can we do to fix the numbers? We can predict what challenges, what changes there will be in the future, and there could be a good future, bad future. We can help steer that course. We can influence what the future will be and make it better for people in this province, for people worldwide. So to me, I find that exciting. I think it will happen. It would be better if the government would play a role in talking about this rather than just seeming to be simply reactive to medicine as it exists now.
What are your worst fears about the system? You haven't answered that. He has, but you haven't.
Well, no. I think that the worst fears for me are quite easy to answer. Some of them are very old fears, but existential risks, those things that could happen, that could wipe out all of mankind and womankind, they're becoming more numerous than they were in the past. We used to think of nuclear war, and that still is quite real. But now we have biological plagues from, new organisms gone wrong. We have nanotechnology gone wrong, various other terrorist threats. So those are the things that I worry about.
Are we prepared for it?
Well, I think it goes beyond scientific preparation. It's also spiritual preparation. And the question there is it only the leaders who need the right mindset? If this is something that anybody could go to college and learn how to do, then we've got to somehow reach out to virtually everybody and give them the right mindset, use this new technology for good.
I mean,
that's
Dr.
what I hope
you
happens.
really touched on a fear that is prevalent in the U.S., of course, and both of you, I know, have been educated there. But this is a very real threat even for Canada as we, considering our foreign policy. So it is worrisome, but how real is it?
I think it's quite real. I mean, we've come close to nuclear war at various points. We have not come close to nanotechnology, annihilation yet, but that's simply because things haven't quite progressed to that point. You might say that SARS and other things give us some idea of what an worldwide plague of a biological organism gone wrong could be. So these fears of existential risks are quite real, but just as real is the positive possibilities of the wonderful future that technology merged with spirituality could bring. And I think that will happen. That's what I hope will happen. But it's not something where we sit back and say, oh, I hope it turns out well. We can actually do something. And it's not just the ordinary people. The people making policy can help shape the future in a way that's more likely to turn out in a positive fashion.
And there's so much to talk about. There's these, as you said, the new diseases. My fear is about the environmental diseases, the ones that are
right.
there's not even a monitor. Having worked in environment, I know that there's not even a mention of some of the new engagements that the Environment Ministry should be actually indulging in. For instance, making a scale for the new chemicals that are getting mixed in our soil and the air.
Right.
There's not even a measuring instrument for them, leave alone a measuring graph for them. So they're not even acknowledged. Is that your fear as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you think of the new cell built on arsenic, right? An entirely new kind of form of cell that we have never had and never studied and don't know anything about. We really, if that got in the hands of somebody who was a maniac, I mean, if there's your worst fear, that could be incredibly destructive on humankind. And the other issue is that some people just don't want to face the possibilities of these issues. And I think it's up to leaders like us and like the government to say, look, these are real things. We have to deal with them, and that's on the agenda, and it's part of our world. We've all seen what a handful of rebels and dissenters can do to the global economy, and so in some ways we're a very fragile world, and so I think we have to be reminded of that. So when we come back to what I think the government should do, certainly the government should do some planning for what I see are some really major issues that could come down the pike in terms of destruction.
Having a province-wide healthcare system should not mean that the academic sector, the people researching, visioning the future are silent. It should mean that they're helping to, inform the other physicians, the other part of the healthcare team, province-wide, what is going to happen in the future, what the positive possibilities are, and how we can actually be in the forefront of making this turn out in a positive way. So I fear a little bit that having gone to a situation where healthcare is province-wide has the possibility of lessening the voice of, the university sector, just because what's uniform across the province is everybody's taking care of patients. Only some people are studying the future and new technologies, but I think we need to have the same intellectual ferment of discussion of patient care on the one hand and research and what's happening in the future on the other that always was there in the past. The pride in the local institution is probably less now because we're all one. And that pride was an important motivator to talk about what you were doing and that sort of thing. So that's one of the reasons that the voices have been lessened. But the people are still here. The people doing the excellent work, or most of them are. And so we need to make use of those people. There is a whole cadre of very bright, innovative, creative people that we need to hear from as we plan future policy in terms of health.
Is there anything I missed out that you would like to?
No, but isn't it great how creative the area of health is and its position in society? The fact that we are sitting here talking about this, to me, has cultural significance because it shows that, in fact, healthcare has risen way above where it was, let's say, 50 years ago.
Yes.
And so we now know that healthcare is an issue that is very close to people's hearts. And that means, first of all, people are much more aware of what's going on. Secondly, they read government productivity in terms of healthcare rather than in terms of political deals with some foreign country. I mean, in effect, we can see a whole host of things that have happened, and healthcare makes it happen. So it's really exciting to be in it, and I hope that the people that are watching this and the people that in the province will get engaged in this, and that the government won't be afraid to say, well, if we go this way, it's going to cost us $100 million, and if we go that way, it'll cost us $50 million. What should we do?
Changing things begins with the belief that you can change things. And what I'm saying is the people watching out there can help to make positive change. They can make all the things that we've been talking about turn out well. They can help with that. It's not just a matter of sitting around and worrying about what's going to happen. We don't need to be passive victims of the future. We can actually make that future, shape it in positive ways. And I think maybe that's the lesson that I would most like to leave.